Abner. So, Abner, how's it going?
Hey, you hear me?
Yes, we can.
That's awesome. Hey, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, actually. So, how are you? How's life? You are in Portland, right?
Actually, no, I'm in Seattle,
Oh,
which
sorry,
is not that
Seattle.
far away from Portland. I'm
Sorry.
just like a few hours away from seeing Andrew Kelly, just driving down. Hey, Andrew. Um, yeah, life is going well here. I just recently moved to a new apartment where I actually have my own office.
Nice.
So I actually have a window where I can look out and see the mountains, the snowy mountains. And I haven't had a chance to have a haircut. You're talking about you want long hair. I would caution you that it's a lot of maintenance trouble. I
Oh
haven't
man,
added hair gel since the pandemic started, basically. I guess maybe the first few weeks, but other than that, no. So be careful what you wish for, Loris.
I see. I've never reached that level of power, to be honest. So yeah, I might be getting myself into something that I cannot control, but okay, we'll see. Awesome. So let me give a very brief introduction to the idea behind this interview, just to give like a bit of background, and then we can start. So the idea is, well, I chose the title. The title is "Software That You Can Love: Discovering the Handmade Community with Abner Coimbre." The idea behind "Software That You Can Love" is I tried to come up with a title that could somehow synthesize what I believe is somewhat in common with the Unmade community and the Zig community, but also a little bit of something that might be there in both communities, but not exactly explicitly said in the Handmade Manifesto or other, I don't know, the Zig Zen or stuff like this. And I think it's obvious consequence of where we all are starting from. But I leave it up to you to actually decide how much this fits your mental model for things. From my perspective, the idea of software that you can love. Let me bring a practical example, like a physical example, not software. So I recently bought a coffee machine, and that coffee machine it's like a mocha, but it can reach 9 bars of pressure and it can make espresso. It's so nice, and I started liking it a lot when it made coffee the proper way. But the moment I started loving that machine is when I broke it. I left it on the fire, or more precisely, like I failed to turn off the stove completely, and the safety seal broke, and I was left with a broken machine. So the moment I loved it is when I kind of had to fix it, and turns out that that machine is well engineered, and you just need an Allen key, and you can break it apart. And I did have replacement parts in the box, and there's a bunch of plastic. Every single piece that can be broken, it can be replaced easily, and that's what basically for me made the thing from something that I appreciate to something that I love, because it's also something that I can take apart, I can understand how it works, and it's not overly complicated. It's not hostile to me. It's really something that I own in a very deep sense. So I think that the same can also apply to software, and I think that's the background around which I think we're gonna have this interview. So, are you ready, Abner?
I am ready. Bring it
Okay.
on.
Okay. So, people from the handmade community obviously know you already, but I think people from the Z community might not, especially because right now we have a big influx of new people, and I think it's time. It's nice to bring them up to speed. It's a good opportunity to bring them up to speed. So, I would say, can you please start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up involved in the handmade community?
Yeah, so I got very lucky that my first job was, well, here's my teacher. I got to work for NASA. It was an amazing experience. So I'm originally from Puerto Rico, and my father, who was in the military, was super into computers and actually worked on the early computer technologies and telecommunications in the army. And he would bring in giant mainframe computers in the basement of my house, and I would be able to see all these computers, 5 years old. Imagine me, tiny little me in the basement, just ogling all of the computers, right? So I got obsessed with computers, grew up with them, to the point where I was lucky that I found Linux programming or programming on Linux before finding programming on Windows. And the reason that's key is that Linux isn't afraid of you looking down its guts, right? Going into its internals and understanding what's going on there. So I got to play with all of these things, poking the kernel using the C language, right? At a very early age, to the point where I guess I got NASA's attention, which was, again, a huge, I was very lucky there. And so I went to NASA. Now, obviously, in between my time with Linux and my time with NASA, in between, there's college, right? There's university. Mm-hmm. And I learned a lot of, I would say, modern C++ ideas of how to write software. And I would just leave it there. And I believed a lot of it. When I went to NASA, though, and I was talking to the senior engineers at Kennedy Space Center, because we were upgrading the launch control system from like the old space shuttle days to a new system where now private companies like SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, Boeing, etc., are using our launch control system, are leasing our pads at NASA and all of that. So I was part of that transition upgrade team. Anyway, sorry. So I'm talking about modern C++ with the senior engineers, and they're like slapping me, just trying to beat some sense into me. Like, no, we don't. For real-time control systems, we wouldn't use modern C++ for these reasons. Or if we would use modern C++, here are the things that we will absolutely prevent you from using because of the costs. And the costs were about performance. The costs were about simplicity when you try to disassemble your code base and try to inspect what's going on, right? And then there's also a cost of like, you're tempted to use a lot of libraries that are going to be slower than the thing you would write your own way without using modern C++ in order to make your systems fast enough to, launch a rocket in time, right? So there, I was like, wow, I can't believe I was taught all of these things in school that are just not applying for the things I'm interested in. I was wondering at that time, like in my early 20s, if there was a, how do you call it? Like a civilian version of what I learned at Kennedy Space Center of how to program. Mm-hmm. That civilian version happened to be Handmade Hero, right? And for those of you who don't know, I feel like the Zig community probably knows Handmade Hero, but they can go Google it.
I would say mostly yes, but if you can just like super briefly recap what it is for the new people, I think that would be nice.
Yeah. So Handmade Hero is a series that's been going on since late 2014. So, a lot of years at this point. And yeah, sorry. So some people in the chat saying they don't know about Handmade Hero. So it's a series started by Casey Muratori, who is a fantastic programmer, low-level programmer in his own right, for sure. And he was like, let's make a video game from scratch. And what from scratch means it's let's avoid using some of the popular frameworks. Let's avoid using some of the popular game engines. And let's try to write a game by writing those libraries that we need ourselves and by trying to understand the whole infrastructure of what is required to make an actual game on a modern machine, right? And that's not necessarily practical in the sense of like, you're going to do that every single time you write a game. You're going to start from scratch. No, right? But it gives you this understanding of how modern machines actually work behind the scenes, right? So that when you are working and when you are programming in your day-to-day, you sort of know how to make simpler choices or wiser decisions of what libraries to bring in or which things to hand roll on your own in order to build the optimal product based on your time, based on your resources, etc. But you have that baseline, right? You have that baseline of understanding of how computers work. And Handmade Hero like inspired that into a whole movement, the Handmade movement, right? And so while he was doing that series, I was getting slapped by the seniors at NASA. And I'm like, I wonder if this is happening in the civilian space. And I saw Handmade Hero. And it was like a perfect marriage, right? Before between the agency and Handmade Hero. There wasn't like an official NASA partnership. It was just me. But at the same time, it was very interesting because I was so passionate, so excited. Still today, like many years later, you can listen to me being very passionate about this. That I'm like, let's start a community. Let's start a community around Handmade so that people can be motivated to learn, what's a CPU for real, right? How many drivers are being installed in your graphics card for you to be able to program your graphics card? And what are compiler intrinsics? What are SIMD instructions? Like, what is all of this crazy stuff that works behind the scenes that makes the software world run, right? And so Handmade grew out of that. And then lots of projects inspired by Handmade Hero now exist on a website. I don't know if you have that available. It's a website called Handmade.network. And the Handmade Network was my initiative with a fantastic developer team that I led for a few years. And yeah, we have a whole set of forums. We have a whole set of projects. We have a community showcase that the new staff is working on. You can see Handmade Hero is like front and center there, but there's definitely a lot of other projects that follow that Handmade philosophy. So yeah, I think that's what Handmade does. And I think it relates a little bit to what you were saying earlier about software that you can love, right? And software that you can repair, because the more you know about how things work, the easier it is to fix these things that you want to fix. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, about so you mentioned that you went to college and you got taught a bunch of C++ concepts that turned out to be not what you needed. What was the name of your what's the word of the course that you were following? Was it like electrical engineering, computer science, something different?
Yeah, it was computer engineering, and then I eventually transitioned to computer science. So when I transferred from Puerto Rico to NASA in Florida, I transferred from computer engineering to computer science. So I've actually tried both degrees, right? And yeah, the courses that they were teaching was, oh my God, a lot of Java, a lot of C++, again, the modern C++ that we talked about. And there was probably one class, just one, that was about computer architecture, which is like, how is a computer systems organized, right? Here's the DMA controller. Here's the L1 and L2 caches of your CPU. This is where they are. This is what a cache miss is. This is what an instruction miss is, etc. That was just one class, and the professor taught it in a way that made it seem like it's archaic knowledge. Like you don't need to know about this anymore, right? So that was curious.
I see. That's interesting. I don't know. I come from, I guess, the inverse angle to this. I think we probably agree on the conclusion, even though we come from the opposite end of the spectrum. For me, I studied computer science, and I think of myself as a computer scientist, not as a computer engineer. And I say that in how can I say? There's some humility there. I am not as good of an engineer as other people, and I'm aware of that. But on the other hand, there are some things that if you have a scientific background, you can bring to the table that a course specifically designed for engineering might lack. That said, I do think that if you are studying, like you could, I think we could argue that if you're studying in software engineering, then going the C++ or P route is suboptimal. And I would argue that the same is true also if you're trying to study computer science. It's not good either way. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would agree. So the problem is, I don't know when it happened, but there was a glitch. It's just me like researching these things, right? And I'm not sure I'm an expert just yet in talking about our history in the field, but I've noticed there was a bit of a glitch in history where programming happened to be a lot more dangerous for at least business people, like when they were looking at people writing software back then. And I'm talking about the days of like assembly and vanilla C and I guess what else was there? Algo, Lisp, Simula, all of these, the old guard of languages, Fortran, whatever. but specifically C and assembly, caused a lot of headaches while we were trying to learn what are the best ways to mitigate memory corruption, or what are the best ways to address things like scaling your software so that more and more people, more developers start going into the code base and being able to jump right in and make things work. It turns out that this is a bit of a craft. Like writing large-scale software in a low-level language is not necessarily easy. Not everybody can do it. It takes a lot of time and effort, right? So I think there was a mix of people that wanted more developers to just learn programming quickly so that the business of their the software in their business can be developed faster. And there was also a mix of people that were so burned by the memory leaks, by the memory corruptions, by the crashes, so burned by it that they were like, I think they swung the pendulum the way extreme opposite to say, you know what, we need to safeguard ourselves forever from all of the things that are low level in computers. So let's build the C++, let's build the Java. Java means it's a virtual machine. And what you write becomes bytecode. And the virtual machine will prevent you from having to deal with memory, right? Allocations and stuff like that. So I would agree that, back to your question, in order to write the best possible software for your users, right, you can't avoid understanding how things work. And that means that languages like Java, modern C++, maybe sometimes even Rust, aren't the best way for you to learn how computer systems are organized, how computer systems function, right? Mm-hmm. You want to find a language that just lets you do what you need to do to learn computers. And maybe even you can either, after you know how computers work, like actually behind the scenes as a developer, you can choose to go to Java, right? I still write Java programs sometimes for work, right? But since I know how a virtual machine would probably be implemented, like I'm not an expert, right? But like, since I know how that works, I can write better Java software because I can make wise decisions. You can go that direction, or you can actually stay because you became competent enough in C, or you became competent enough in assembly, and now you can write software using that. And then you're going to be more performant. Hopefully you make simpler choices because you don't have a lot of complexity in the language. So there's only so much complexity you can bring in because the language doesn't have that complexity. So that's good, right? Mm-hmm. So I agree with you. I don't think software engineering courses teaching you only JavaScript and only Java and giving you like one architecture class and telling you this is archaic, just get an A or B and move on with your life. Like that's not where we want to be as a field. Yeah, I agree with that.
Mm-hmm. There is one thing though that I think I understand it, and I think probably also the public understands it. But I think we are circling around it now in this discussion, and I'm curious to see if maybe you want to take a stab at it directly. You mentioned this duality: higher level languages that jail you into. They give you freedom by jailing you right into a subset of what the machine can do, and you pay a performance hit. And to some degree, over time, over like generations, you pay even like a ignorance hit if you always stay there. But they free you from undefined behavior. Let's just say undefined behavior.
Sure.
And yet, why are we considering where does C++ sit? So by the way, in the Z community, we kinda have these conflictual relationship like with C++, because C++ represents, and that's what I'm trying to get at, represents there's something different, right? There's something about this C++ that in my mind makes me think of it as like the worst of both worlds, because it's like overcomplicated and you still get the memory bugs. And it's like, why don't you put C++ in the full control of the machine camp? Because technically you could.
Yeah, well, I think it lets you have full control of the machine, but the language itself has grown so complex that you are gonna have a tough time having control of the machine in the best way. And I'll give you an example. And I think I've mentioned this. Sorry, the Handmade community, sorry, I always give this example. It's like my favorite example. So when I work on my projects, my personal projects, right? We can maybe talk about my projects later, but like I'm writing a terminal emulator, for example, side project. And this terminal emulator is now using Vulkan as the graphics rendering layer, right? And Vulkan is a complex API, right? It's trying to abstract modern GPUs across different vendors, which is crazy, right? But okay, at least it's a vanilla C, so the API is simple to look at and understand. But when I go online to learn about Vulkan, and all the tutorials that you see there, they're all using modern C++. I think even today, if you go and Google Vulkan tutorials or Vulkan helper libraries or Vulkan wrappers, I think to this day, everything is stored in C++, modern C++. Even though the language, right, the API of Vulkan is vanilla C, right? But nobody is writing wrappers or anything in vanilla C. They're just using modern C++, right? Now here's the problem. As I'm learning Vulkan, I go to the most popular Vulkan tutorial, right? And this Vulkan tutorial goes in and starts to import 3D models, which is fine. Like we want to learn how to import 3D models, so here's an OBJ, whatever. But then the author goes into importing a lot of stuff from the language from C++, like an unordered map, right? And then it overloads a lot of operators so that it's easier for you to index. So like as you're iterating through the vertices, right? You store the unique indices in the unordered map. But because when you do that, you're trying to deduplicate stuff, right? But there's overloading of operators. There's importing unordered maps. Then there's like defining template specializations for custom hash functions, right? So that then you can use the indices of those unordered maps as structs of like the vertices. So like you have your unordered map and then you index it. Instead of a number, you get to use like a struct or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what? So following all of that, right? Do you think at this point, you know how machines actually work? Are you understanding that at all? Are you having an experience of like, oh, now that I'm learning all of these amazing things of modern C++, I understand how machines work? No, right? You're being shoehorned into all of these abstractions and complexities of the language. So even though C++ technically lets you, right, dig deep and learn, in practice, it doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't. It never happens. So
I see. I think your point of view kind of mirrors also what is the general consensus on our side of the fence. I personally, I made this joke, I think, already in the past, but I made this vow of never smoking, never doing drugs, never having premarital sex, and never writing C++. And C++ is what is allowing me, thanks to the logical conjunction, to keep my vow. So that's one of the reasons why I'm in the Zig thing.
Unbelievable, man.
Anyway, okay, so but
more power to you.
Talking about this kind of stuff, okay, can you explain to me this blog post? I look into NASA's coding philosophy by Abner Coimbre. I scroll down, and I think it covers mostly what you were saying, but can you explain this? Should OOP be the future of programming? Let's join the Rust evangelism. Strike Force lul. Is Go like totally better than language with other design goals? ?
Good times. Yeah. So this was funny. This was, I was telling you the story of like NASA was teaching me optimal ways to program the way I wanted to. And I came across Handmade Hero, and those things were merging. And I'm like, I want to explain my experience of how NASA got me to learn about Handmade and Handmade Hero. Mm-hmm. And so it's funny because as I was writing this article that apparently a lot of people loved, so even like the press published it and everything. So very grateful for that, because it was like new. It's like, oh, you can actually learn how computer systems operate and then program with an understanding of things. You can be a developer like that. Yes, you can. You can. And so the examples you showed earlier was real world examples, like actual people saying, young developers, go join the Rust evangelism strike force because Rust is the future. And if you don't use Rust, right, then you're lame. You're a loser. And I'm like, but where's the meat in your argument, right? And I'm just obviously I'm choosing the common denominator of the Rust strike force, right? I don't want to paint all Rust people like that, obviously not, right? But there were enough people saying join the Rust evangelism strike force, or definitely learn object-oriented programming, LOL, because it's the thing to do, right? So it's like this, find your identity to concepts that, or to ideas that are just like not very useful for writing good software. So that's why I wrote the article. It's like, wait, hold on. Here's what NASA taught me. Here's Handmade Hero taught me. Let me just show you a contrasting experience of like, here's the opposite of joining the Rust evangelism strike force. This is what the opposite looks like, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I wrote that article. Yeah.
I see. Makes sense. Well, yeah, there's a lot of tribalism, I guess, around languages, and some of it, I guess, it's natural. People
and text editors and frameworks.
True, but for languages,
browsers.
I think especially, there's an industry that fuels that way of thinking, in my opinion. Like the fact that languages have companies behind them and huge marketing muscles. I mean, we could make, okay, we just mentioned the Rust evangelism strike force, but another example where there is no, how can I say, there is not as much perception of it being an evangelism strike force, but a very marketing fueled language ecosystem is, in my opinion, C# in the Microsoft world. They run conferences that are not officially under the Microsoft name, but there's all the Microsoft influences there, and they present their Microsoft stuff. And Abner, just given what you just described, let me tell you about the latest and greatest. There's this amazing framework called Blazor that allows you to run C# applications written MVC style, so very pumped to the brim with OP stuff and all the nice things in the browser. It's one of those things that makes you regret JavaScript. At least that's my impression. But anyway,
Gotcha.
Okay, so let's move to the next question then. So you got to the point where things started with the Handmade community. It's been what since the start? 5 years? Did you say? I don't remember.
Yes.
5 years. Okay. So how is the Handmade community organized today, and what is your role?
Yeah. So the Handmade network, the community I organized around Handmade Hero and Casey, I ran that for a number of years, again, with an amazing developer team. If you go to the Handmade network website, you go to the About page, you'll still see the other people that worked on it. It wasn't just me, right? Anyway, so that original team eventually passed the baton to new people. So there's a new team now. So you have Ryan Fleury, who is a great friend and is now like, he did a lot of internships at Apple and Insomniac Games, and now he's like at Rad Game Tools, which got acquired by Epic. So lots of crazy stuff. So he's in charge now of Handmade.network along with other people, great people. And then I decided to take a step back. And you were just talking about the marketing side of things, like how people, and I agree with you. So the reason people joined the Rust evangelism strike force isn't so much because of the tribal portion of that segment of people. It's because of the marketing, right? So you have this big tech, big corporations, giant PR muscles from Mozilla or Google or whoever it might be, pushing these languages as the holy grail of how to write software these days, and then they just eat it up, right? I was like, well, what if I want Handmade, or what if I want this idea of programming with an understanding of machines, programming with a simpler set of language constructs, with a eye towards better end user experience, with an eye towards not being bloated, with an eye towards not crashing all the time, not being slow, etc., being buttery smooth. If we want that to happen, we also are going to need some degree, some marketing, some kind of set of conferences, right? And that's where I'm coming in. So I am now running conferences. I'm calling them Handmade Seattle. which is the spiritual successor to Handmade Heroes conferences. So Handmade Hero used to do conferences. They did like 2015, 2016. There was a break. People were saying, Abner, we want handmade conferences again. And that was being asked all the time. I decided, okay, let's do conferences for handmade, which I think is a good step in trying to fight against all of the stuff that the modern languages that we disagree with. I think that's a good step to do things. So running conferences is a good idea. So that's what I'm up to these days, is running conferences. Of course, my professional history, right, was like after NASA, I worked for Thekla for a few years for Jonathan Blow until March of last year. So actually, it's been a year since I left NASA. And now these days, I'm working for Cyan Worlds, which is the company that made Mist, right? And it's a fantastic company to be in. So yeah, but in terms of the handmade stuff, I'm running conferences. I'm hoping that handmade conferences 2021 happens, right? It's going to be in the fall. So that's what I'm up to these days. Yeah, so you have the Handmade Network. You have Handmade Hero is kind of separate. And then you have Handmade Seattle, kind of separate, but we're all still part of Handmade, right? Mm-hmm. So.
Okay. Thank you. So,
or I should say, props to Cyan, because they hired me as an actual systems programmer. Right? So like they use Unreal Engine, they use blueprints when it's needed, but they also have engine programmers that customize the Unreal Engine in amazing ways that I didn't know you could do, right? Mm-hmm. And now they hired me as a systems programmer, so props to them. Part of it was because they knew about me and they knew about Handmade. So the whole conference stuff and the whole community stuff, pushing for mainstream acceptance of low-level programming, it's possible. Like companies take notice. You just got to keep working at it.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Well, you have to play the game, right? It's easy to cry that boo-hoo, big tech is doing things, and yeah, they are. But at the same time, it's the ideas don't push themselves. You need somebody to push the idea, and you need a medium to do so. And conferences.
Not everybody has to do it, right? You don't want all low-level programmers having to like a lot of marketing and like make their website super pretty. I mean, I advocate for that. I'm like, you have to do both the hard, deep work of understanding machines and programming at a low level, but at the same time, you want to write websites. I get a lot of flack for that. I'm like, no, you got to write websites. You got to stream sometimes. You got to interact with the public and try to be respectful about it and have conversations with people who don't know about low-level programming, but who might want to work with you, right?
Right.
You got to do those stuff. Not everybody, but a few key people have to do it.
Yeah,
at least.
I agree. Makes sense. I think at the end of the day, obviously, the whole point of doing things is just to enjoy the programming, I guess, to enjoying the tool. Like I mentioned my coffee machine, but I don't do that all the day. My point is, I would just want to enjoy the coffee. But then when you are a community leader, when you are yourself an influencer, I guess, I mean, again, I do use the term in a, I'm going to say, mostly depreciative way, but that's also what I do, and you have to own it. And when you're in that position, you got to play the game. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. So we talked about your origin story and how you got your systems programming superpowers. We talked about the handmade community today, briefly, at least structurally. And the next question, I guess, is more about why you're here now, because you know about Zig, right? So how did you learn about Zig? And I also know that you mentioned earlier your terminal project, right? And I know that you're using Zig in there somewhere. So how has been the experience for you?
Yeah, I don't even remember how I found out about Zig. So I have to think back at it. It's nice though, because that's a good sign that it feels like Zig has been around forever. And I wish that were true, right? But anyway, so yeah, for my terminal project, which is on, if you're interested in my terminal project, you can Google Handmade Seattle, because I gave a talk, then click on the media page, and you'll be able to see the terminal project there, just in case you're curious about.
Yeah. I think
personal side project.
I think
right
I have it. Is that the
now.
page?
Nice. Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
Yeah. Early ideas and prototype. That's the one. Yep. It's coming together. It's a little slow because I have a lot of things to do. Conference, full-time job, right? But I really care about the terminal, and I want to release it as a alpha sometime this year. So yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I am using Zig CC for that because Andrew Kelly appeared on both Handmade Seattle 2019 and Handmade Seattle 2020. And so I had a great experience talking to Andrew, and I had a good experience learning about what Zig is. And I'm like, oh, wow, this looks to me personally as a possible replacement, an actual possible replacement of Vanilla C. And I don't say that lightly because I love Vanilla C, right, so much. But Zig seems to be the one contender, right? Not Rust, sorry, not C++. It's definitely possibly Zig. And Odin as well. So Zig and Odin is part of Handmade. So you have Zig and Odin competing for my affection.
Right.
Anyway, sorry. So yeah, I'm using Zig CC, and you can see in that thread that you're showing there.
Yeah.
I decided to compile because the terminal is going to be cross-platform, right? It's going to work on Windows, on Macs, and on Linux. And it's going to be native, and it's going to use Vulkan. Like those things are possible, right? So Andrew said, a Zig CC can help you because it's a drop-in C compiler, that cross-compile across the different platforms that you care about. I'm like, okay, let's try it out. So I did, and then the thread that you're showing was my experience using Zig CC. I got a bunch of errors. It's like I was trying to clean up my code base, and it turns out, like if you try and click on one of the tweets that have a number 2 in the replies, this actually is the longest tweet thread I have ever had in my entire adult life. Right? So why? Because Zig CC discovered a UB, an undefined behavior bug, in Sean Barrett's code, because I use some of Sean Barrett's code. And bless Sean Barrett, love his libraries, right? And it turns out that Zig CC was the only compiler. I've compiled my terminal using multiple compilers, right? GCC, MSVC, you name it. Zig CC was the only one that discovered right away by default this undefined behavior bug. And I pulled in Sean. You can see Sean there talking about it. Like, I think it was about portably addressing a 2D array, right? Turns out that the way he was doing it is portable, apparently. I say apparently because I'm not even sure this was ever resolved, because we actually even brought in C++ and C community members into this thread. If you keep digging hard enough, right? And they were just talking for days of like, is this UB? Like, what does Godbolt say about this? And it's like, wow, okay. John Rager, who's a fantastic person who is like key or the king of like the literature and fuzzing compilers and breaking compilers and stuff like that. And yeah, there he is. So yeah, we were like all scrambling around trying to figure out, what happened. And that was just how Zig CC, made things interesting for me. So that doesn't mean I'm using Zig for my terminal project. I'm still using Vanilla C, but I am compiling the project with Zig CC because this was amazing. Like we definitely want to see this out there more in the wild. So that's my experience with Zig so far.
So okay, so it went well. That's very good to hear.
More than well. That was quite a treat. That the tweet thread was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So okay, so we know now how you know about Zig. Let's see. Okay, so you are in this interesting situation, I guess, where well, I guess you're not the only one, because I know that there are a few people in the Zig community that are also part of the Handmade community. And I guess, but that said, I think you are, I guess, in a position where by being somebody that is an organizer in the communities, I imagine you have a point of view that tends to be, how can I say, more attentive to the high-level meta stuff, like the ideas behind the community, right? I was showing earlier the Handmade manifesto, which is I recommended it as homework for the people to read before joining for the interview, and I do recommend it again. It's a nice read. And so the question would be at this point, so if you were to compare and contrast the Handmade and the Zig communities, based on your experience, what would the main commonalities and differences be?
Yeah, so interesting. I think what we have in common is that we, as community leaders, care about using, I guess, empathy as the strategy to grow systems programming. Right? I think there's this perception. It could be accurate, it could be inaccurate, it could be in between, of like low-level programmers being kind of assholes and jerks and not being able to work or cooperate in large teams. And that is a perception. Like the perception is real. You can argue of whether how true that is, but the perception is there.
Mm-hmm.
We can't deny it. And so to me, it's been very important to find out how to use empathy as a useful lens, right? As a useful strategy or a knob that you turn and dial, that you're aware that it exists, right? In order to make sure that low-level programming, the community, right, can work across boundaries, right, with artists, with gameplay programmers, with executives and business people. Like we want to grow low-level programming such that software becomes usable and a joy to use again, right? But for that to happen, you need empathy. And I think Zig, because of you and because of Andrew Kelly, of course, you guys also know how to apply, I guess, emotional intelligence, however cringy that sounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you know how to apply that in a way that is useful for the community. And so I try to do the same thing. And I think what we also have in common is that we care about the end user experience, right? So the end user experience is king. For that you can love, like you said, part of it is like being able to go in there and fix stuff. That's kind of open source stuff. I guess Handmade doesn't do too much open source. But at the very least, the end user experience, we care about that. And I think we both also have a bit of an allergic reaction against big tech, right? So we are not fond of how giant corporations are producing software for people to consume. And it's not just like the whole performance or this is slow stuff. Of course, that's important, but it's also about how we treat the user. So end user experience, and it's not just about the software that you're interacting with. It's also how you interact with users in terms of how you manage their data or how you extract value from your users in like this perverse relationship, trying to get as much money as you can from it. I think we also have an allergic reaction against that, right? So yeah, and I think we also have an interest in foundations because Zig is a competitor to replacing C, right? I think you guys are also interested in the longevity and ownership in the digital space. And let me explain that. Because when you're writing software using something like Zig, I feel like you're also learning to, again, understand how machines work, but also when you're doing that, you get to make simpler choices about how to build your software. Like, no, I don't need these two libraries. I sort of know how that works, and I can build my stuff this way. When you make simpler choices with a simpler language like Zig, your software lasts longer, right? Because you don't have all these crazy radioactive frameworks and libraries that are going to rot or you have to update all the time, right? So obviously there's always a spectrum, right? You don't want to go, like I said, you don't want to go from scratch all the time. That doesn't make sense. But you don't want to pull in lots of dependencies all the time either, because you're going to spend the same amount of time fixing those dependencies or upgrading those libraries as you would just spending time learning how things work, right?
Yeah.
You're spending the same amount of time.
And you don't learn anything at the end of the day.
And then you don't learn anything in the other side, right? So you want to find a good middle ground there. And I think Zig and Handmade both agree with that. Let's see. I think in the difference department, I think Handmade has ideas of having solid foundations early. So you're going to see a lot of newcomers in Handmade writing their GUI libraries from scratch or writing their text editors from scratch all the time. And I feel like that's a little too much sometimes. But it's like, because we care about having our own foundations early on, I do feel like Zig maybe is okay with like adding, Zig works really hard, right? To have bindings for other languages in order to bind to libraries quickly. And you want people to develop software faster sometimes. And that's So to some degree, you're kind of okay with reaching out for external third-party stuff and keep writing your Zig software, and that's perfectly fine, right? I'm just trying to find some differences, right? Then Handmade does a lot of indie projects that are closed source, or that we're trying to sell, right? Which I also think is fine. I would love to see more indie hackers selling their tools, right? But there's not a lot of open source in Handmade, which you could argue is a shame. Maybe we should have a little more of that. But I do think Zig is really into, especially because of Andrew and yourself, really into open source. And so that's another difference that we have. So I think hopefully those examples cover common stuff and the different stuff between us.
Yeah, so you raise a bunch of very good points. Let me ask a couple of follow-up questions about two in particular. Or rather, maybe I can add a little bit of context from my side of things on one, and the other is it's a pure question. So I think that on the idea of foundation code that lasts longer, code reuse, we normally tend to reason about this concept in terms of code reuse. The idea is, well, I guess it's a different way of wording roughly the same concept. And for example, that's one reason why allocators are an explicit argument. That's what allows you to bring your stuff into freestanding environments like embedded stuff where you don't have the same type of scale of memory that you get on a main machine, on a normal machine, or also WebAssembly. And like that's, for example, one manual thing where you have to do a little bit of extra work because you have to wire your allocators everywhere that you need to allocate. But then that's like a key thing when it comes to code reuse and also other things. So yeah, that's interesting. That said, though, I think that for us, you hit the nail on the head, I think, about that, because I think that we do have this goal, but given how young the language is and how everybody is, we're all just getting started, and we're trying to make things work however we can and try to climb into basic use cases, and being mostly open source first community, I guess. We are not afraid of showing unfinished projects, like non-completed yet. And that actually still leaves the question unanswered. I'm optimistic about it, but the reality is that today we don't have like a fleet of super high quality projects that you can say boom, 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 checkmate, and we'll need to get there. And I think that's gonna be, and I think as you were saying earlier, solid foundations, early mindset, solid engineering mindset is something that we will need to learn how to tune with the other approaches, because we need to get there, otherwise there's no point.
At the same time, I think Handmade should learn, especially me, to push things out there more often. Again, we can go into extremes too quickly. So I guess your extreme might be pushing projects all the time that aren't necessarily complete yet, because you're more, I guess sometimes you're more curious. You're still experimenting with the language, and experimenting with all the new features that you're adding. I guess you're stabilizing at this point, but you know what I mean. Whereas for us, well, we're not using Zig often, right? So we're using stable languages, old languages like C. So we're like focused on making things really solid, really early, and have the best possible projects to show. But that goes all the way up to even like myself, where like I only do a conference once a year, and I take a long time making sure that all the videos have subtitles and all the videos are perfect editing. And like I don't stream very often either. I know you stream pretty often, to the point where you even scaled it back a little. but that's good, right? Like pushing things out into the world to become visible is important. And for me, if I take too much, even with the terminal, right? Like I started the terminal in 2018, November of 2018, right? It's 2021 now, and I have not released the terminal for anybody to try it out. Nobody, just myself. That's a little bit too much, right? So I think I could learn a little bit from you as well. So
I see. Yeah, I could probably learn to edit my stuff and not just push it on YouTube. I publish videos where I leave the 10-minute break in the YouTube video. I'm sorry. I'm thinking I should.
No, so yeah, I'm very allergic to that kind of stuff. But I shouldn't be that allergic to it, because then you have all these other communities and languages just like pushing stuff all the time, and I'm sliding into obscurity.
Mhm.
Right? You can't let that happen either. So
yeah, these are interesting points. So, okay, here's a hard question, which is a follow-up of a point that you mentioned earlier. So you mentioned empathy, and you mentioned the perception that in systems programming sometimes people are assholes. Let's flip the point of view around, and I know, based on my experience, so this is not strictly about systems programming, but I think it's the same mindset. I remember a while ago when I used to play competitive video games. I'm from the Call of Duty 1, 2, 4 generation, Dota 1, Heroes of New Earth, Dota 2. Probably a few people have gone through my same I don't know, addictions, illnesses. Anyway, and I remember being either being part of clans or being the owner of my own clan, and I remember getting angry at people. I remember feeling disappointed, and I remember not always screaming at people, but sometimes yes. And in hindsight, not always, very rarely in a productive way. So if we think about this when it comes to engineering is maybe not exactly competitive, but there is good and bad engineering. That's like, engineering is not relativistic. The point, you can do, or you can succeed or you can fail, and there is a scale of doing well or not. And so I can see why people from that same mindset can get angry and heated in when having arguments. So my question to you is, what do you know? What is the mental mechanism that allows you not to fall into that mindset? Can you think of what it is?
yeah, I don't know if I'm an outlier or not, but I love systems programming, and I love spending a lot of time deep in thought programming. Right? Even today, like I mute my Slack at work for an hour or two just to program and not be influenced by any external factors. So I get really serious about programming, and again at a low level if I can. At the same time, I love people. I love socializing. I love interactions. I love being empathetic. I love being understanding. I feel like that's a key aspect of my personality, I suppose. And it's just, I don't think it's ever going to go away. So I guess it's a good combination. It's probably, I don't know if it's a rare combination, but throughout my life, lots of people that I've talked to who are also systems programmers, they think I'm a little crazy that I love interacting with people so much, right? And because they prefer, again, they just them and the machine, right? Touching the soul of the machine, whatever that means. Like that's their life's calling, and they think that spending time with like lots of people and maybe hosting events or parties. Like I got intern of the year at NASA, which was amazing. That's one of the reasons that I got catapulted to being employed at NASA for real. It was because I got intern of the year. Me, this lonely Puerto Rican boy, right? That comes from a traditionally poor background and all of that. I was just like, no, let's work hard, but let's also party hard. Let's organize events. Let's become a community. But don't forget about spending 2 days on your own programming, okay? Like it's not all about socializing. So I was like that kind of person always. And so I'm not sure I can explain what the mental mechanisms behind that are. Right? They're just there. I guess practice could be important. If you being empathetic towards other people is a practice like any other. I think it's a skill like any other. To some people, it comes more naturally than others. Right? And not everybody has to feel good and friendly with everybody, especially if you're like complaining about how a piece of software is causing you trouble. It's okay to be angry, right? But there are strategies about how to express that anger to your maximal benefit, right? Yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question. It's just part of a weird combination that I have, and I guess I'm grateful that I have it. Hopefully.
Okay. Well, thank you. I guess, does it answer my question? I guess yes.
Probably not.
No, I mean,
well, I don't know. Yeah.
I think if I had the full answer, I would not be asking the question. I would be, I don't know, somewhere else making money selling this idea to big tech. No, I won't. I wouldn't. But yeah, I think it's an unsolved problem, because the reality is that a lot of people, like, you don't always know precisely why you react the way you react. Let me give you one interesting example. This is in the Zig community. This is a recent example. I'm talking about people in chat right now. I won't name names though. Now that we have a new influx of newcomers, there's a lot of people that come in the Zig Help channel and they ask questions, sometimes basic questions, but there's one interesting class of people that tends to annoy members of the community. And for example, this was this recent interaction where somebody came in and started, this was a new person, so you only know the nickname, right? You don't know anything else about the person behind the nickname. You don't know their age, you don't know their background, you don't know anything. And this person starts saying, oh yeah, I'm interested in Zig. I just joined because of the recent stuff. So does Zig have a garbage collector? And people say no. Does Zig have a borrow checker? And people say no, it's manually managed. And this person says, oh, that's no good. And everybody starts tensing a little bit. And the person says, well, this person says, well, just manual memory management could be a problem. Is there any plan for a garbage collector? There should be. Or I'm paraphrasing. Maybe this wasn't precisely the how it was worded, but that was the general interpretation that I imagine people would give. And that's when people start feeling a bit angry, because the problem is that this new person is completely oblivious of the basics. And I myself reading this, I was saying, oh shit, what? No, this is not a good use of time. In my case, the mental mechanism that made me go what I believed is the right way was because that's kind of my job, and I feel I have a responsibility of getting these things right. But I understand where people are coming from. So, by the way, just to be clear, my answer was actually, in hindsight, the opposite one. I replied to the person, this is how we are going. This is the Zig philosophy. These things at this point in the project are not in discussion anymore. You should learn about what the points are. There's a talk by Andrew that usually people watch and gives a full overview of the philosophy behind the language. And the idea is you look at these points, and if you like them, come on board. We're going past Mars. We're going to another galaxy. And if you don't like them, then you should look into another language. These are, at this point, set in stone. And once you get there, you realize that, yeah, you reply this, and that's the end of the discussion. And maybe the other side might not be receptive, so I'm not saying this is like the silver bullet. Sometimes things cannot go well. But the initial reaction of, look at this person hating, ignoring, being ignorant about our philosophy, and you fall into these things.
You want to channel that energy. Like, there's nothing wrong with being angry. Let me just be clear, right? I'm not wanting people in the low-level programming communities to sing Kumbaya and hold hands, especially with the people that are creating the bad software that they're forcing us to swallow through big tech or big corporations. Like, that's not the point. The point is to channel your anger in the maximally productive ways. And engineering, the core engineering work is king, of course, but it is also embedded in a social context, right? And you're working with other people. ideally, like if you want to have good software, the things we consider good software to be part of the mainstream world again, social context is also very important, and you need to learn how to channel the anger. I think your strategy was very good. Like you could have gotten angry and just outburst in a way that taints the image of Zig to some degree if you keep doing it all the time, right? You channeled it into the proper way. You gave the right answer, and then that shuts down the discussion. And then you keep learning how to do these things if you keep practicing it. Yeah, but it's not about kumbaya, singing kumbaya. It's about how to channel your anger in the right ways and how to be relentlessly optimistic about change that can happen in the world. And I'm very optimistic about it. Handmade Seattle, last year we had to go online because of the pandemic. I worked really hard to make sure that it was worth it. I worked with 16 speakers, 12 presentations, and I was just applying all of my strategies of like, how do I make people feel good in a pandemic? Because even some of my speakers caught COVID, right? It was extremely stressful. But I'm like, no, I'm going to make it happen because we want the conferences to continue no matter what. It's crucial, right? And it worked. 13,000 live viewers across the whole weekend. We were on Hacker News front page all weekend, and hundreds and hundreds of people registered for the private chat, bought tickets, even though the event was streamed for free, right? Like these strategies work. Empathy as a strategy to grow systems programming is effective. It works.
I think we are getting a very interesting point here. Awesome. I agree, by the way. It's the same for me, like with Showtime. I need speakers. Like this show doesn't exist without speakers, and I'm a slut for speakers. So every time I have to make a choice, it's always speaker first, even before viewers, because viewers, yes, I do want viewers, but speakers are the most scarce resource, and they bring a lot of value to the table. I'm not in a situation where I can pay speakers, so it makes sense. And I think like everything connects. I think pretty well. You don't do this because you want to sing kumbaya. You do this because you want to achieve a result. Kind of like in normal engineering, you want to achieve a result by operating a machine. Here you want to achieve a result by, sounds maybe bad to say this, but operating other humans. While other humans operate on you, like it's not like you are the mastermind that can control the puppets. You're very rarely in a similar position. So others act on you just as much as you act on them. But you can try to do your best to obtain a outcome that is beneficial to you. And that's a very interesting point, by the way. I think this point is so nice. I will ask people to keep that in mind, because I think we have unlocked some extra content in the end connected to this point. I'll come back to this later after we're done with everything. This is going to be nice. So you already mentioned a few things that, in your opinion, the Zig community should try to do based on your experience with the Handmade community, and maybe also some things that you think the Handmade community should steal from Zig. Do you want to go more into this, or do you want to move forward?
Yeah, I think I have to process it, like see what initiatives would be the best for Handmade to adopt some of Zig's ideals. And I run conferences. I don't run the community anymore. That's Ryan Fleury and his team. But I think some of them are watching this interview. Like it'd be great if they're keeping tabs on what we've said, see if they have ideas that came out of this. But I think more initiatives to do the things that Zig does, like pushing for more projects, even if they're not complete, but different enough projects that get people excited would be good. I think getting more open source software projects in there would be pretty good. So yeah, but since I'm not leading it, I guess I'll have to talk to the team, see what they think.
Okay.
But, yeah, it's very cool stuff. I'm glad we had this discussion about that.
Okay, so next question, I guess, is so you mentioned that everything started for you by watching Handmade the Hero by Casey Muratori, and then you mentioned also Jonathan Blow. So I would like to understand a little bit better what the relationship is between the Handmade community, Casey and Jonathan? Like, do they have an active role in the community? How are things nowadays?
Oh boy, that's quite a question. Let's see. For Casey Muratori, he's definitely still doing Handmade Hero, and we definitely have a good relationship. We still talk, and Handmade Seattle is operated independently of Handmade Hero. Like, it's not part of his company. It's not part of Model Rocket. Like, it's my own thing, right? But he's very supportive. So, like, he streams Handmade Hero. He promotes Handmade Seattle often, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So we have a good relationship there. Somebody in the chat saying Casey's actually streaming right now, right? So Handmade Hero is still going. It's still part of Handmade Network, technically speaking, because like if you go to Handmade Network, you see Handmade Hero forums still active to this day, obviously, because the series is still going. So I don't see much of a problem there. But in terms of like Casey running the Handmade Network, he's not, right? He's just hosting his project in the Handmade Network, but his project is his own thing. And now he's doing something else called Star Code Galaxy, which is like this course where he teaches Intro to C in a much more long form foundational way. Handmade Hero started with Intro to C, but it was only like a few episodes, and then he went hard on like, yeah, here's how you write a software rasterizer for your graphics engine. I'm like, oh, okay. So he's like, no, let's take some time to learn C with Star Code Galaxy. So that's his own project, again, separate. So yeah, we have a good relationship, but he's not involved running the community or the conferences, even though he promotes the stuff, right? But as far as Jonathan Blow, I see him as orthogonal to Handmade. I don't see him as part of Handmade. The only part that he took in that I think was useful was like the Handmade dev show. So I used to stream interviews, literally just like type in like handmadedev.show, for example, and you'll see that I interviewed Jonathan Blow. And I guess I figured that interview that I had with him was crucial for me to getting a job with him, I suppose, right? But it was just an interview. In terms of him being part of Handmade in any way, it's just no, it's orthogonal. He expressed support early on, but yeah, it's been a long time.
So 2016.
10 years.
Oof. I see. Wow, we're getting old.
Hey, I'm still not 30. So it's just funny because like I have jokes on my early streams, right? Where I would say when you're 30 as a developer, you're dead. You're as good as dead, right? I was saying that back when I was 22 or 23 or something. And now that I'm 29, I'm like, no, take it back. I take it back. You can be an amazing developer in your 30s. This is great. So yeah. Mistakes that you make. I can't believe I still have many regrets of how I used to stream like 5 years ago that are still online. Oh my God. And I would get drunk on chocolate wine and I would talk about Majora's Mask. I debated Casey with Majora's Mask in public about it being the best possible game. I mean, I still have a Majora's Mask necklace right here.
Yeah, I actually watched this. So to bring everybody up to speed, yesterday we had a test just to make sure the camera worked, audio levels were fine, etc. And Abner mentioned this discussion, and I also like Majora's Mask. Yeah, I also watched this, and I found it funny. So here's a small challenge for you. Actually, sorry, let me show this to the people because I wasn't showing. It's one of the links that you can find on handmadedev.show. By the way, .show, nice TLD. So in this I guess episode, you brought up points about Majora's Mask that were commercial success, execution in a limited time frame, and technical achievements, I believe. These were the three main serious points. So you deliberately cut out, I guess, what we could say, story, like appreciation for the game from more of an artistic perspective, right? Rather than an engineeristic one. If you were to make an argument in favor of the storytelling part of Majora's Mask. What would you say? And just to give you full context, I plan to pick this up at the end of the interview after everything else, and I'll tell you my point of view of Majora's Mask based on when I played it while I think I was in high school. I played it a bit earlier, but between junior high and high school. And I'll tell you my perspective. And I also, I think we can also reconnect, from my perspective, some of the themes of Majora's Mask to building communities. So.
Wow, that's fascinating. You got my attention. So, oh boy. So for Majora's Mask, sorry, it's a very personal game for me, only because it's a story about facing impending doom or impending disaster, and also confronting the people that are suffering because of that disaster or impending disaster. You're the one trying to heal their sorrows, and you're the one trying to make sure that they collectively find a way to fight against whatever disaster is happening, right? It's funny because this is really tied to Handmade to some degree, right? Where I just connected deeply with that because it's a very personal story for me, because I connected in the sense of like how I was growing up in Puerto Rico under difficult circumstances, how I had a terrible time learning English, and I had an accent until I still have an accent, but like I had a difficult problem talking English until just a few years ago. And then the challenges that I faced at NASA, which was, again, as somebody who came from Puerto Rico under the circumstances that I came from, I felt like the moon, right, was trying to crash, and I would lose everything, and I would have to go back as a failure, right? So stuff like that are themes in my life that connected with the themes of Majora's Mask. And then also the fact that I love learning about people deeply and and see if we can heal each other somehow. I know this is kind of vague, but that's what Link did in Majora's Mask, right? Yeah. It was just going around and finding the right people to heal. So once you heal them, you get the masks that then are useful in order to fight against the moon crashing, right? And I'm like, it's been themes of my life in so many ways, right? And that's why I can't give you like an objective storytelling perspective of Majora's Mask. Is that even possible? So it's hard to like explain precisely what parts of the story of Majora's Mask are better than like previous games, for example, because I just connected with it so hardcore that I am too biased to give you like a good explanation. So that's how much I love Majora's Mask. I talk about it all the time. And chocolate wine for some reason. So chocolate wine and Majora's Mask, very important things. So Vanilla Sea, Majora's Mask, chocolate wine, NASA, space exploration. These things just like engulf my life. So
I see. I think that was an amazing answer. I don't think I'm in a position either to like fully recap Majora's Mask for people that haven't played it. Like I know there are some people here, like I bet King probably hasn't played it, too young, but yeah, if people that have played Majora's Mask, I think get what you mean. At least I think I do. So that was nice.
We're gonna get me emotional, so let's move on to something else.
I promise you, promise you, this is gonna be worth it. I have the part that I connected with Majora's Mask was completely different, but it still, I think, points in the same direction. So that's gonna be nice. Okay, so we right. So the reason why I was asking though is about Casey and Jonathan is because as you mentioned, by the way, also to give a little bit more context from my perspective, I also was following Handmade Hero when it started. Like I remember waking up in the middle of the night just to watch an early stream that was on a weird time in Europe. It was at a weird time for European time zones, and I remember following along for a long time. And so it's a bit in. But that said, I never got past. How can I say? I never got past that. I watched the streams. I knew the Handmade manifesto, but I never entered the community. Actually, before starting the recent job and then Zig, I was never a particularly social programmer. I was just doing my own things in private, and like I didn't do open source on GitHub. I didn't use Twitter. I deleted Facebook as soon as I got out of university. So it's like I wasn't the kind of person that felt like, oh, I want to belong to a community. Anyway, so from that perspective of an outsider, it's a bit, at least it seemed a bit fuzzy what this relationship was. So going forward with this general idea of understanding a little bit these personalities, and I think Jonathan Blow is in particular the most, I guess, interesting, maybe controversial one. So you mentioned earlier that you worked at Thekla and you were part of the compiler team, right? You were working on JI.
Right, I was working on the JI. I was part of the original JI compiler team. Okay. Jonathan Blow, yeah.
So you worked there, but then you left the company. So what were the good and the not so good things about working at Thekla? And
oh boy,
why did you decide to leave at the end?
I need to get my hair loose for this one. Okay. Yeah. My goodness.
I think I'm not the first one to ask you this question.
What was the question again?
So the question was, what were the good and not so good things about working at Thekla, and what made you ultimately decide to leave? I'm not the first one to ask you this question.
I guess it's been enough time has passed where hopefully I won't come off as a grumpy employee, right? It's been 1 year since I left. I've given the matter a lot of silence and deference, right? So if I talk about this now, I feel like at least people will understand that I am not coming from this as a grumpy employee. So I was there for almost 3 years, so about 2.5. And it was quite interesting because complete opposite of NASA, right? The complete opposite of Kennedy Space Center. NASA is a big organization, lots of people working together towards a common goal. With Thekla, it's a really small company compared to my team at NASA, of course, right? Barely 20 people, or less than 20 people, and only 3 of us in the company were part of the compiler team. So it was myself, it was Joshua Hosman, also a great friend. And if you go to Handmade Seattle, I've had podcasts with Joshua Hosman, so you get to learn about his philosophy. He's a great compiler engineer. To this day, he's working as a compiler engineer elsewhere. And then Ignacio Castaño, who was the senior graphics programmer for The Witness, right? And he worked for John for almost a decade. And I think The Witness would not be what it is without Ignacio's input and without Ignacio's graphics rendering work, right? So the 3 of us were part of the compiler team, about the same length. I guess Josh was there longer than us, but yeah, it was interesting working on the compiler because John was also part of the compiler team. And with that is that not only is John our boss, and not only is John the president of the company, he's also on the ground working on the compiler with us. Okay? So that's a fascinating dynamic to have to experience, right? And that's fine. But yeah, I guess I can get very specific about recent events and that happened at Thekla, and then maybe from there move backwards, right? Mm-hmm. So about 2 or 3 months ago, I think, maybe December 2020, I have no idea. There was like this Q&A video that Jonathan Blow did and put up on YouTube, where he's being asked why the compiler team shrank to just 1 person. In other words, back to him. Yeah. Like, why did Ignacio, why did Josh, why did I leave? I feel like I don't want to cause trouble, but I feel like he painted a rosy enough picture of himself that I have to provide a counter argument or a counterpoint from a team member's perspective, mm-hmm. or next team member's perspective. So he said that the project was going off the rails and that the compiler, right, wasn't up to par because sometimes programmers that join his company will have ideas of how to program that are bad because you followed examples on the internet that are bad code examples, et cetera, and that because he was busy all the time, which makes sense because he's the president of the company, fine. Right? But because he's busy all the time, he couldn't be there making sure things don't go off the rails all the time, right? And
sorry, can I interject for a second? I watched that video, and the way it came across to me was that he said that he felt he was part of the problem, but then like he started by saying it was a communication problem,
Sure.
and I'm probably part of the problem. I'm as Jonathan. But then he went on to say that the things that you said, but there was also another interesting in between where he said that he thought that the philosophy would be clear because it was in the code and from his perspective, and he also would stream and explain stuff. And so he was, this is, I'm paraphrasing, but you can find this in his answer. He saying, at that point he says that he expected people to understand the philosophy by reading the code, and I guess also by watching the streams. And there was also another, I guess, level of failure that he ended up basically pinning on you, I guess. At least that was my interpretation. So I just want to point this out. By the way,
well, none of us. Oh, go ahead.
No, please continue. I'll just bring up the link in the meantime.
Okay, so none of us would have enough time to watch all of the things that you would talk about on stream, etc. Right? And I would also say that because the picture that he painted was super rosy for himself, he didn't have enough time to explain the things that we contributed to, right? Which were important things. In his company, everybody knows in his inner circles that John is a visionary. And I mean this in a very positive sense, right? Like John knows how to give a good vision for his ideas and a good vision for his projects. But ultimately, there is a bit of a brand. Like I don't think he cast this brand onto himself. The lone genius programmer brand, which people ascribe to him, like he doesn't disavow it. Right? So people see him as a lone genius programmer. But the truth is, even all the way back to Braid, John always had people working for him and helping him out. And that's not bad, right? I'm just trying to clarify. Like even for Braid, like the one who decomposed the gnarly frames on Braid and make sure that it was in a shippable state, part of that was Sean Barrett, right? And other people, I think Casey Muratori is in the credits too, etc. And again, this is not a secret. Again, I'm not painting him in a bad light here at all, not at all, right? Like if you go to the credits, all the people are there. That's fantastic. But I want people to realize that he has a lot of help in making sure that whatever he writes or whatever he talks about, it gets tightened up and optimized and cleaned up to the point where it's a shippable product, right? That's Ignacio Castaño, for example, for The Witness. That's the amazing, talented artists that I met at Thekla. That's the amazing senior programmers. There are plenty of senior programmers at Thekla. Well, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 people at least. And I don't know if that's less or more now, right? I haven't been there for a year. So we know that he put something out there and we take it and we try to make it shippable, right? And part of what I did at Thekla was also putting something in the code base that would help make things shippable, right? So my test framework helped uncover hundreds of compiler bugs, right? It was Joshua Hosman who provided the LLVM backend for the JI compiler and make sure that it wouldn't regress across platforms. So the JI compiler works on Linux and it works on Mac, largely thanks to Joshua Hosman, right? And again, like I did the testing framework and I would document all of the bugs and I would fuzz things in the compiler such that we will uncover even more bugs, and et cetera, right? I wrote example programs, example games, and so on, and while contending with all the compiler bugs and whatever. So I'm not saying that the compiler team was perfect in the way that he would have wanted, right? There probably needed to be some mentorship, some direct mentorship in order to get to the point where John would feel comfortable doing what he does, which is providing a vision, providing streams, providing, writing code. He's not a bad programmer, obviously, right? But then have people at the company go in, tighten the screws, and push something out there. So I think we weren't ready at that level because he cares about the JI compiler so much, to such a degree, that I feel like we weren't up to his standards, whatever those standards might be. I don't think even to this day those standards were made very clear to me. Part of it was because he's busy, sure, but part of it was also, I think, a communication problem. Like, how do you? I need to defend Ignacio. I need to defend Josh. Like, these are great programmers. Use me as a scapegoat if you want, but these are amazing developers. And like, Ignacio's not hurting anymore. He's, oh my God, he's making back on other companies, and so is Josh. Josh is doing a fantastic compiler engineering job elsewhere, right? I don't want to speak for them, but I do want to say that 3 of us left in less than a year. Whether the 3 of us were at fault, or John was at fault, or whatever, it doesn't matter. What matters is that there actually was a communication problem between the compiler team and John, right? And that communication problem caused us to leave. Like, we weren't fired. At least not all of us were fired, right? So Ignacio Castaño left out of his own accord. I left out of my own accord. And Josh has a different story, a much more gnarly story, which I don't want to go into because it's not my place to do that, right? So I guess going from that Q&A video, I just want to say John is a human being like any other. He makes mistakes like we make mistakes as a team. And we left. Ignacio left and I left shortly after. And then Josh also left the company for gnarlier reasons, right? So, but that I don't think were his fault either, right? So it's kind of, I don't want to talk about this, right? I don't like it, but the fact that I receive DMs all the time and I receive communications all the time with, like, from the John Blow fan base, that he's perfect and I'm incompetent because he fired me. I'm like, that's not true, right? So let's just put the record straight at the very least, right? That probably ties back into the whole empathy strategy thing. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's affected me quite a bit. So the reason I give this a year of silence and deference is, like, I just don't want to think about this anymore, right? Like, it was rough working for him. It was rough receiving emails past midnight all the time. It was rough having the beta opened up during Christmas when we weren't around, and having John put readmes on the compiler for the beta user that said, whoever did blah, 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 my team is fired. Like, jokes like that, right? I don't like that. I disagree with that. And I feel like his position as an influencer for the low-level programming community is something that I am now calling into question officially. Right? There's plenty of people. Again, there's Handmade Seattle, there's Andrew Kelly, there's Casey Muratori. I highly respect him. There's lots of people who don't engage in the kind of crazy things that happened during the compiler team. But at the same time, I gotta admit, right now I'm venting a little bit, right? Because even though I gave it a year, there's definitely some grumpiness right now. You can hear it in the way I'm talking. So let's be clear about this. Thekla is a great company. The people there are amazing. I love them. There's friends there that I deeply care about. Right? And I also think that John has a great vision. I hope Jai gets released. Right? And I hope that the compiler is successful. I think it's a better replacement for C++ for sure. I think that there are languages like Zig and Odin that compete with JAI, not a problem as well, right? So I think we should take this as an interesting situation where no one person should be like the saintly leader of any community, right? We're all human beings. John himself has said this. Again, I don't have problem with John or the company. I guess it's the public messaging that John has been doing that I would discuss against. And then the whole thing with, this is the last thing I'll say, the whole thing with the compiler team being shrunk to 1, the people that DM me or the people that talk on Reddit that Josh, Ignacio, and I are somehow incompetent, that's not true, right? Ignacio left out of his own accord, I left out of my own accord. There was a communication problem with the entire compiler team and with John. And that's it. I don't think he was at fault completely, and I don't think I was at fault completely, or Ignacio was at fault completely. Josh was a fault completely. I'm just highlighting there was a communication problem, and that's what happened. So.
Okay, thank you. I think that
John didn't harass me, by the way. It was part of the users, part of his fan base, right? So let me just get that clear there as well. I don't want to cause trouble for Thekla or the people there. Like I said, I'm just putting out the facts that I think are accurate. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have to say, as an external observer who occasionally watches John's streams, and also based on my experience doing what I do in the Zig community, that what you're mentioning, basically carelessness in how he communicates publicly, causing negative side effects, is I can see that. I personally agree with your description when it comes to how the Q&A was structured. And actually, if I were to be honest, from my perspective, I would even say that there is some ego in there, and to protect a self-image, then you guys were thrown under the bus. But anyway, that's just my perception. But I've seen that also on streams where Jonathan is, for example, ranting about high-level languages, which is fine, but the way he does it and the way his fan base understands it ends up like being kind like almost borderline harassment. I even screenshotted once this interaction. Again, it's Twitch chat, so it is stupid and you cannot fully control it. But man, you can do a better job than this. At one point, he was complaining about higher level languages, etc. And I don't know, soon after, somebody came in and said, what does everybody think of Ruby? And everybody started shitting on this poor guy that just joined. And everybody said, oh, these things are stupid, you're stupid for using this stuff. And there was the reply, and the literal reply of this person saying, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I just started programming and I wanted to know everybody's opinion on this stuff. Thank you. It's like... You cannot be completely but the problem is, if you want to give Jonathan the respect that I believe he deserves, because as you said, he's a visionary, and I can say that I also recommended his talks to multiple people in the past, and I actually would continue doing it today. It's hard for me to say that he's not noticing this at all. It's really hard. It makes me think that there has to be some degree of acknowledgement of this and saying, yeah, I'm fine with this.
I saw a user in your chat saying what I wish I would have said in a shorter way, right? He's saying, Pulp user, sorry for calling you out. I think John has very good points, Pulp user says. Wrapped in decades of frustration and a certain amount of communication deficit, and phrased in deliberately offensive ways.
Yeah.
So I think, again, company itself is great, and the way he leads the company seems to be good to me. It's just, again, I just need to put that out there. It was very specific problem with the compiler team, and I think it was a mix of what I just read out loud, but also the fact that he is not only a president of a company, and that's tough, but he also has boots on the ground. And we didn't get much guidance. We didn't get much communication. And to his credit, in the Q&A video that you showed, he definitely says that he needs to be more hands-on. Okay? Yeah, it's funny. Like I don't think the claim that the programming team, especially when the compiler team, the claim that the compiler team was incompetent and therefore we were fired. That's the one thing I want to make sure that people know it's not true. Right? Like we all have our full-time jobs again and getting paid well. And so far I hear nothing but praise from my employer gratefully. Same with Josh, apparently, I believe, and same with Ignacio. So, and even as I was getting ready to leave, John was telling Josh and myself shortly after Ignacio left that he was getting ready to expand the scope of responsibilities of the compiler for me and for Josh. So you can imagine our surprise when we saw the Q&A video. Right? It's like you said one thing in private, but then painted things differently in public. So I don't expect him to like self-deprecate himself in a public setting, but at the same time, this is my counter offer. People can believe it. People can think I'm a liar. It's whatever. I just hope that if anybody comes to the Q&A video again and goes on Reddit and talks about the original compiler team being sucky, at the very least, we have an auto reply that I can just send to those people that are causing trouble.
Makes sense.
So.
Whoa, that was an intense question, huh?
Well, it was the right time.
Okay.
Probably it was the right time to ask it. Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you. If you want to take a sip.
Get it off my chest.
Okay. Yeah. If you want to take a sip of water, please do. Sorry, I even interrupted you.
I'll do more. Yeah.
Okay. Whoa. That was interesting. Let's move towards the end of the interview, and then I'll do my extra beats. That I think they're gonna fit so well with how all the things that we covered. So, based on all that we went through, how would you like the Handmade community to take shape moving forward?
Well, it's quite a question after everything I've just discussed, right?
Yeah. I think it's the question, right? I mean, it's nice that you are able to tell your side of the story, but at the end of the day,
yeah.
What are the implications for everybody else?
It's the question I don't have a concrete answer for, and I think if I should say anything to Handmade, first of all, is not all perfect. We're all humans. We all make mistakes. Don't idolize your leaders. Don't idolize me. Don't idolize anybody. Worry about becoming a better programmer. Worry about understanding how machines work, as I always say a million times. This is the Handmade Hero message, and I subscribe to it 100%. I would also say that I believe that you need a combination of both competence and empathy in order to succeed, in order to make sure that the world isn't being swallowed by bad software. Because I'll tell you this. Since we talk about JAI, I guess I'll wrap it up by saying, if JAI comes out as a product and it's better than any other language out there, significantly better, I would say in public, you should switch to JAI instead of C++, etc. Like if after I objectively evaluate it, right? The person behind it, doesn't matter if the product came out, and especially if it becomes open source, especially if it becomes licensed, etc. Right? And we can just make it work, right? But at the same time, let's say you have somebody who is having issues steering a ship with a lot of people trying to get good products out there. Then because of the lack of empathetic strategies, that ship sinks or that ship fails or it gets rocked too much and the product suffers. Why would you want to do that, right? So if all of that bad stuff happened and the product came out and it's better than anything out there, hooray, right? I will praise that. Who cares? Same with Linux. Linus, you know Linus's asshole routine, performative jerk routine, right? I'd still prefer Linux because I can inspect the guts of it. I can that's how I got my started with programming, thanks to Linux and not Windows, right? But what if the way you are a performative jerk, or the way that you are being very sucky and demeaning, or et cetera, what if that causes your product to fail? Right? Or what if it causes your product to not have enough traction to fight against the big tech, the big corporations that are pushing software that we don't like, right? So I think you need to be both competent and compassionate. And being those two things, it's extremely hard, especially when you're so angry with the state of software, right? So this is a difficult call that I would make onto people to try to develop both your skills to socialize. And again, this doesn't mean kumbaya, right? You can tell somebody this part of the code base sucks, it's terrible. Here are my suggestions to improve it. What do you think, right? You can do that. but be careful not to take that too far. So I think for Handmade, I just implore you to become your own developer on your own rights and stand alongside the giants. You can do it. You can do it on your own. You can do it with the community helping you. Doesn't matter. Just focus on that and don't idolize all of your leaders. I think that would be so useful. And it will cause people like me in the future less pain and anguish and having to leave a job that you thought was amazing.
Whoa. Okay, thank you. That was another intense one. I will actually say the same for the Zig community.
I have a history of being reluctant. I hope people know this. Like, if you go back and try to look at, I have a history of being very reluctant to talk about people in a negative way. Like, I don't like it. Like, I'm very uncomfortable right now, right? But hopefully this serves as an auto reply for people who keep bothering me about this, right? So I guess I appreciate you asking the question, making all of this crazy stuff happen so I can move on with my life, hopefully.
I think we should do so. One final question, just to wrap up. This is an easy one, and then, as I promised,
yes, let's go back to happy times.
I'll share with you my perspective on Majora's Mask. I hope you'll appreciate it. So. And seriously, this is I want to do this. I want to share it with you. The viewers can spectate and maybe they enjoy it too. But really, this is for you. So, but before we get there, so any practical things that we should try to do together in the near future? We, as in the community and Handmade community.
I even have a list. Ooh. Okay, so let's see. Any practical things we should try to do together? So I would love to keep collaborating with Andrew Kelly and Zig from Handmade Seattle, the conferences. Again, these conferences are becoming bigger every year and thousands of more viewers. Like I said, last year we had 13,000 live viewers, front page of Hacker News all the time. Lots of people interested in Handmade. I like that. So I think Zig definitely deserves a space. So I kind of want to do like a 50-50 on the conferences, where like 50% of the content are familiar, recurring things. And then the other 50%, it's like hopefully new stuff, like new people, new voices, new speakers, etc. So I feel like if Zig wants to continue being part of Handmade Seattle, I would love that. I would love to keep inviting them and making that work. So Handmade, I would love it if you joined the Handmade Network Discord. So in the forums. So right here, yeah, there's the handmade.network. You can register an account. There's always talk every single day. There's always people talking all the time. I love it. Talking about low-level programming. And you have a community showcase. That community showcase are just like really at the very top. You have really awesome projects that are being shown on Discord. And so the new team, Ben Business, for example, bridge Discord and the Handmade Network so that you can see things being posted on Discord showing up on the website. In case you only want to be on the website, in case you only want to be on the forums, you won't miss out on the fun Discord stuff, right? But if you also want to be part of Discord, then go to handmade.network and click on chat on Discord. Love to chat. I'm there too. You can ping me and say hello. I'm very open to talking to people, as you know. And then for Handmade Seattle specifically, subscribe to the conference newsletter. If you go to Handmade Seattle, yep, there's newsletter right there. You can join the newsletter there, and I give notices of like, here are the tickets that are available. I would love to see you in person, right? If it's possible. And if you want to show your project and maybe become part of the conference, you can email me and maybe we can talk about it. Like, I usually put up a call for software projects on the newsletter. Like, hey, I'm interested in demoing projects on the conference. And then I think we can collaborate with Zig more that way. So I think those are the three things that would be useful. Keep working with Zig on Handmade Seattle. For Zig users to join the Handmade Network forums and vice versa, or the Discord, and join the newsletter for the Handmade Seattle. So I'm very excited to see what happens.
Thank you. So that was really nice. That was an amazing interview. Thank you very much for sharing all that you shared.
I'm exhausted.
You are?
How dare you? I'm so tired.
Okay, so here's the deal. Chat, you have one chance and one opportunity. If you want to ask questions to Abner, write them down now. I think we should not do too many questions. This interview has been really long already, but you have some time to write them down. I'll pick a couple. In the meantime, I'll do what I promised Abner. So Abner, here's my Majora's Mask bit, and I think this ties perfectly into all the discussions that we were having. So it's not just Majora's Mask, it's Majora's Mask, and I think how it connects to other things that you mentioned. When I was in school, when you're in school in Italy, I think in high school, you have to study this guy called Pirandello. I'm not a big fan of all Italian literature. I feel like it's kind of, how can I say, it's boring. I always got the feeling from the way it was taught that you'll never be as good as the old masters, this kind of feeling. But regardless, Pirandello was from the First World War, and he wrote a bunch of interesting things. But I remember when studying this, how smug I was feeling, because I felt like I was seeing a better interpretation of all the ideas that Pirandello would show. Now, to his credit, he was First World War. So, for example, he would do a bunch of things that would break the fourth wall, meta stuff for the theater. For example, one theater opera is 6 characters in search of an author. So, and the characters interpret characters who are looking for an author. It's this kind of stuff. And I remember feeling super smug because I was going to school fresh of Metal Gear Solid 2 with the crazy ending, which I do not fully understand, but I had examples of all this stuff. And Majora's Mask was another example. Another thing that Pirandello is famous for is the idea of the mask, let me read this abstract. So Pirandello is fascinated by the ironies inherent in the belief or in a single absolute identity. Many of his plays and prose writings center on the clash between a fixed notion of identity and the multifaceted nature of a man's role. And the problem of the shapelessness of identity offer both tragic and comic possibilities. And I think that this is captured also in Majora's Mask, right? You see in Majora's Mask the characters when and you see that both in a tragic and a comic way, sometimes even at the same time. I remember the Swordsmaster, who is very stoic until the third day, where he cracks and he hides in the backside of the building. He's hidden somewhere, I think, like in a sack or something, because until the earlier day he was doing a lot of big talk, right? And there's also the postman, I remember, also the sisters that run the farm. Like you see how. It's tragic and comic at the same time when things get real, impending doom. But here's an angle that where I think that Majora's Mask is strictly superior than Pirandello. And again, maybe this is just stupid millennial way of thinking. But anyway, one thing that I really loved about Majora's Mask was that not only it encapsulated this idea, but it brought it one notch further. At least that was my interpretation. Every time you see somebody that you heal who died, right? Because you only get masks, I think, from dead people, if I am not misremembering, right?
Yeah.
So the idea
unfortunately, when their souls are released because they healed, you get the mask. Yeah.
And the idea, in my opinion, the way I interpreted this is that, and their masks are always about I guess their more prominent feature, right? You get the musician's mask, and then you have a guitar, etc., etc. And my interpretation of this is that it's the inverse of this concept here presented in the abstract, is the idea that everybody has to have a mask anyway. Nobody will always know you for who you are entirely. So once you realize that having a mask is inescapable, the mask is all that remains when you're gone. And so you want to be deliberate in painting your own mask, because that's all you leave behind. And yes, in a sense, it's a tragedy not being able to express yourself entirely as much as you would like. But once you realize that this is what it is, I think you can see how obvious. I don't. It feels kind of obvious, like to me. Like Link is obviously only able to pick up the public part of these characters, and maybe sometimes he can also get a glimpse of the inner workings when he heals them. But then that's what remains, nothing else. And I think that's a very interesting angle, which connects to all what we say right now, right? You always end up having a public face, and thinking that you want to be entirely natural, you want to be yourself, and the consequences will be what it be, but that's who you are. In my opinion, that's inherently not true. You always have a mask, and that's all you leave behind.
You know why I love that? Because there's, the creator of Majora's Mask was not happy with his invention, let's just say, right? Mm-hmm. He did not necessarily want a remake to happen, and he felt like he couldn't find we could say it this way, he couldn't find his identity after he made Majora's Mask. It's like he doesn't find himself in there. And I'm like, wow, that's powerful. And thinking that, but I'm like, what is the public mask of the creator versus who he is internally that made him say that, right? So it ties beautifully to everything you've said as well. So, oh my goodness. Okay, so am I supposed to answer questions on the chat? Is that what's going to happen?
Yeah, how many of those are there? Oh shit, I hope
just a few. People say they're exhausted as well. Okay, well, it's only a few, so I'll answer them real quick. Yeah. Has Abner played Secret Hitler? No, but I have to play it. If you go to Handmade Seattle media page, I talked to Loris Crow. I interviewed him. We reversed roles, right? And then he recommended Secret Hitler, so I have to play Secret Hitler. You'll see, maybe tonight. We'll see. Abner, how thou art so cool. I'm not super cool. I'm cold. Okay. And what are some tips for someone just getting into low-level programming and Handmade? Join the Handmade network, either the Discord or the forums, and just ask questions. The people there, like Martins Mosaico, Simon Ancieux, if I said that correctly, and others, are just bottles of knowledge ready to burst and to give you some help. And then Andrew, is that question for me or for you, Loris? Once we are vaccinated, will you come hang out with me?
It's for you.
Portland. Andrew's gonna cook for me. I love that. Yes. And see if you can buy some chocolate wine, and then I'll go. I'll do a road trip. I promise. Cool. Have you considered making your own programming language at some point? No. I think either JAI or Zig or Odin. Those are my 3 top contenders of a language that can replace my love for C, right? So let's just wait and see what happens. I think, given everything I've said, it seems like Zig is positioned to eke out a victory, but Odin's also there, JI is also there. They're not too far behind in terms of popularity, right? So we'll see what happens. What's your favorite chocolate wine? I'm a cheap person. Choco Vine. So Google Choco Vine. That's the one I like. A simple person.
Okay.
All right.
That's it then. That means then that we finally can take a break. And Abner,
thank God.
Are you still okay? Can you do the second half?
Yeah. I hope the second half if you give me a good break.
Okay, so let's say it's gonna be a 10-minute break with maybe a couple minutes more. So please be patient with us. So see you everyone soon.